Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Tanya Kirk, the librarian at St John's College, Cambridge, and chair of the CILIP Rare Books and Special Collections Group. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 2025 conference, which takes as its theme Systems, Standards and the Discoverability of Special Collections. If you don't know, the RBSCG is a special interest group of CILIP, which is the Library and Information Association of the UK. And if you're not aware of the group, then we aim to unite librarians and archivists responsible for rare books, manuscripts, archives, and other special collection materials. We promote the study and exploitation of special collections material, encouraging the awareness of preservation, conservation, and digitisation issues. We also develop training opportunities related to the maintenance, display, and use of collections. We advocate for our collections and our specialist roles and promote best practice across the sector. And we're also involved in the revision of the mark fields for rare books and have published guidelines for cataloguing rare books as well. And I think it's appropriate that we should bring this group of experts together to explore over the next 3 afternoons how we make the discoverability and ultimately the use of the collections in our care better. Our conference will look at new approaches, whether that's adapting standards to meet local requirements or embracing new methods to enhance discoverability. So today we'll be hearing from colleagues who are working in university and museum libraries about how they've approached rare book and manuscript metadata creation and enhancement. Inclusivity in our collections and work remains an important topic. And papers on the second day will cover sensitivity in literary archives, as well as cataloguing standards and the challenge of representation. And then later in the conference, we consider the changing landscape of metadata creation and use. And we'll be hearing about the role of JISC in metadata transformation and aggregation, as well as RBMS standards. It feels as though every now and then a topic emerges that dominates conference programmes and dinner table discussions. And at the moment, that topic is AI, and of course, it appears on our programme. So we'll be hearing presentations on new initiatives and uses for this emerging technology. And importantly, we'll also hear about responsible use of AI in cultural heritage. I am absolutely by no means an expert in this area, and so I'm looking forward to hearing from those who are, because whilst we might disagree on the applications of this new technology, I think one thing we can agree on is that it's not going away anytime soon. Indeed, responding to new technologies and applying them to the often centuries-old collections for which we are responsible is a defining feature of rare books and special collections community and of our conferences. So to talk a bit about the format for these 3 days, we will be having a 20-minute presentation from each of the groups of speakers, followed by a short Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, please could you use the Q&A or chat function, which will be monitored throughout the three days. And I do really encourage you to comment and ask questions. I'm looking forward to the conference being part of an ongoing debate, and it's a real chance for us to share knowledge and ideas within our community. I know that's what I really value the conference for every year. The more eagle-eyed among you might notice that the conference schedule doesn't include our usual AGM. This will be happening separately this year, and more information will follow in the coming weeks. In addition to thanking all of our speakers and you, the audience, for joining us, I'd also like to note the ongoing support of our conference sponsors. These are AM Digital, the Booksellers Association, Conservation by Design, Facet, Harwell Restoration, the Institute of English Studies, part of the School of Advanced Study at the University of London, and Willard. And in your delegate pack, you'll find information about all their activities and services, so please do take a look. And I'd like to apologise to anyone who had trouble accessing the delegate pack. If you have ongoing issues, can you please contact the conference organisers, and we'll try and work out what's going wrong. I think most people should have had access to it. I think there's some glitches in the system. To let you know also, all sessions are being recorded and the links will be shared afterwards, so you can always catch up on something if you want to watch it again. And now I want to do a tiny bit of promotion from our newsletter editors, so something to be thinking about over the next 3 days. We'd like to hear from anyone who's interested in sharing their experiences from the conference in our autumn newsletter. We welcome written pieces that are from 500 to 1500 words to share what you've learned, any ideas or inspiration, or the overall experience of the 3 half days. Our newsletter is available openly via the RBSCG website. There's 3 issues a year, and the content is all written by members of the Rare Book and Special Collections community. So it's another really great way of collaborating in the sector. If you're interested in contributing about the conference or any other aspect of your work, we're always looking for submissions. Please do contact the editors, Catherine Crick-Pridgeon and Jane Gallagher. I'm hoping that someone can pop their email addresses into the chat, and they'll be really delighted to hear from you. Our deadline for ideas for this newsletter is the 19th of September, which is a Friday, and submission to the autumn newsletter will be Friday, the 3rd of October. That's the full kind of written submission. At the risk of preempting comments I'll make later in the conference, can I all ask you to be thinking about any feedback that you'd like to provide and to complete the short survey when you receive it. We currently alternate each year between an in-person and an online event, and that decision, along with the choice of conference themes, developed directly from the feedback that we receive. So it's really important for us to hear from you and to continue to reflect through our events what the community wants. But for now, that's enough thinking about the end of the conference. Without any further ado, let's begin it. It's my very great pleasure to welcome our first speakers, Ben Cornish and who are both from the Natural History Museum in London. They'll be speaking about a systematic approach to prioritising rare books metadata creation and management at the Natural History Museum. So over to you, Ben and Grace.
Thanks, Tanya. And thanks to the organisers of the conference. I'm excited to be here talking. So just a very brief introduction from myself and Grace. So I am the lead metadata librarian at the Natural History Museum 3 days a week, and 2 days a week I am the systems and cataloguing lead for the NHM Unlocked project, Library and Archives. Grace, I don't know if you want to chip in.
So I'm also wearing 2 hats. For half my week, I'm a digital special collections at the museum, and the other half of the week, I'm a metadata librarian, so a cataloguer.
Thanks, Grace. So I'll just briefly let you know what we're going to be talking about today. So Grace and I are going to discuss some work we've begun doing at the Natural History Museum. We've been doing this work along with our colleague Andrea Hart in relation to standards. In this presentation, we're going to outline a little bit of the history of rare books collection management and cataloguing at the museum. We'll then move on to discussing the codification of a local minimum standard through comparative analysis of local approaches as well as national and international standards. Following this, we'll discuss evaluating our collections against this standard using ALMA Analytics and SQL, which has helped us to identify records which need our focus, before concluding with some discussion on how we are visualizing and reporting on this work. So to start off with, here's Grace.
Hello. So the Library and Archives of the Natural History Museum, London, hold more than 1 million items, nearly 400,000 books, 22,000 active journal titles, 350,000 artworks, and over 100,000 catalogued archival items. Of these, almost 29,000 books are designated as special. But how did they come to us? What makes them special? And how will we continue to analyse and improve how we describe them? Ben will shortly talk about the latter. I'll begin with some historical context and what rare books mean to us. When the NHM opened to the public in 1881, it had been created to house the ever-expanding natural history collections of the British Museum. At that time, around 5,000 natural history books, duplicates extracted from the British Museum Library, were transferred from Bloomsbury to South Kensington. Due to changes in planning, there was no dedicated library space at first. Instead, books were placed close to the scientists and their specimens, under the supervision of departmental keepers, rather than gathered in a single central location. Our first librarian, Bernard Barham Woodward, devised the museum's own classification system, which he named after himself. Over 150 or almost 150 years later, we still use the Woodward system to classify many of our holdings. Today, our collections are grouped into 8 main libraries: anthropology, botany, entomology, general, ornithology, paleontology, and zoology. And cataloguers have 105 sections in which to place a book, journal, manuscript, or artwork. While Woodward's scheme remains dominant, we also employ other systems, including UDC, alphabetic, alphanumeric, and numeric classifications. For example, botany special books are classified using UDC, entomology special books are alphanumeric, and Woodward is applied to most of the remaining special books, with some exceptions for named collections. Woodward's vision was twofold: to provide a working reference resource for museum scientists and to create a repository of rare and unique texts fundamental to the study of natural history. To achieve this, he collaborated not only with museums' keepers, but also with antiquarian book dealers such as Delau & Co. and Bernard Quaritch, as well as the bibliographer Charles Davies Sherburn. Historically, each subject library was managed by a dedicated subject librarian until an internal restructure around 2010. Cataloguing and classifying rare books fell within their remit, with more complex items passed to the central cataloguing team. Special collections have always been curated as part of subject libraries, and their separation from open shelf collections has long been in place. From 2012, however, responsibilities shifted. The library was split into divisions, and a dedicated special collections manager role was created, which continues today. Priorities for cataloguing have often emerged through auditing, checking our holdings against catalogue records and shelves. Original collections are addressed first, and copy-specific details are added as they come to light. Since Woodward's time, the special collections have grown substantially through purchases, bequests, and donations. Some of our most significant works were gifts from collectors such as Sir Walter Rothschild, Henry Doubleday, and Arthur Hay, 9th Marquess of Tweeddale. Certain acquisitions are preserved as named collections, including the Tweeddale Library, the Botanical and Horticultural Library of Blanche Henry, and the John Murray Library, which contains reports from the Challenger expedition. Others, such as Rothschild books, have been partially integrated into the subject-based collections. But rarity is not defined solely by donor or monetary value. Sometimes it lies in ownership and annotation. For example, many of paleontologist Richard Owen's books are not especially rare in themselves, but his extensive annotations make them unique, offering insight into a scientist at work and deepening our understanding of his research. As the first director of our museum, Owen's words have particular resonance. Whatever the reason for their significance, accurate copy-specific data cataloguing of our collections ensures that researchers not only find the title they seek, but also the right copy of that title. Of course, practices have varied across the collections, and dealing with legacy cataloguing remains an ongoing task. We continue to identify discrepancies arising from past data migrations, from card catalogues to digital systems, first Unicorn and now Alma Primo. These newer systems give us improved tools for managing locations and metadata. And with that, I'll hand over to Ben, who will show you how we're advancing this work.
Thanks, Grace. You've got some context there, but a little bit more context in relation to this particular project that we've been doing here. So this work came out of a library-wide desire to create some metrics along the lines of KPIs for us to be better able to assess areas of work to focus on, to be able to track change over time, to recognise and address gaps, but also crucially to be able to advocate for and demonstrate the work of the library. So one of these metrics was to be what proportion of rare books are catalogued to a minimum standard in the Natural History Museum library. So to calculate this metric, we needed to know a few things. Firstly, we needed to know what do we consider to be a minimum standard? And secondly, is there a way to apply such a standard to our collection for us to be able to come up with some quantifiable numbers to answer this question? So we set about devising a minimum standard as a three-part job. So the first part was involved evaluating pre-existing standards. So these focused on what might be called data content standards, and particularly ones which gave us some guidance on levels of cataloguing. So initially we carried out a review of local documentation, which revealed we had quite extensive documentation on what a full approach might look like, but we had not explicitly considered a minimum standard that could be applied across a whole collection. So that was the initial starting point. So then we moved on to looking at other standards. These are the ones that we considered that are on screen. So I'm more than happy to talk about any of them in the Q&A, but I think we've kind of decided here that we're going to focus more on about how we ended up writing our local standard and how we then applied it, rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of these particular standards. But just to sort of talk in a more general way, I think we could say that the older standards here, like the Rare Books Group one, which technically isn't a standard but rather a recommendation of cataloging level, these slightly older ones tend to have a higher bar for what a minimum record might look like, as opposed to a more recent standards such as RDA and the DCRMR, which currently doesn't have a section on a minimum standard anymore, unlike its predecessors. So the main difference really between them when considering minimalness is around the extent to which things like notes are needed, subject access is needed, and as Grace was talking about, how much copy-specific information is required. So the DCRM B says the purpose of a minimum record is to describe, distinguish, and identify, not really to provide multiple access points or describe the resource in great detail. So that's sort of the position we were starting from. So having read and evaluated these standards, we then moved into comparing them. So this involved some spreadsheet work. I've tried not to have too many images of spreadsheets in this, but there are some, unfortunately. But so this is a spreadsheet that we created to try and look at how we could assess what these different standards were saying in relation to types of information we might want to record in a or create a record using. So this involved mapping the standards to each other using a kind of expanding metadata element set. So whenever a new element was mentioned by one of the standards, it was kind of added. So not all of the standards obviously mentioned the same elements and so on. So as an example, the guideline for cataloguing rare books in relation to extent of manifestation instructs us as a minimum to record the printed pages or leaf numbers and the number of volumes for a multi-volume work. But for their conception of core, that would involve giving a pagination for all leaves and a pagination for multi-volume works. Meanwhile, the descriptive cataloging for rare materials B says we should record the number of units and the types of units of which a manifestation is composed. So yeah, this was some work we did here to look at this. We then, from here, sort of try to bring it together in writing our own kind of minimal standard. And this is what we've ended up with, which I think is something along the lines of an application profile, but a pretty minimal one, because as mentioned, we're focusing here on like a minimum standard, sorry. So yeah, we have this element set, which is made up of elements from Mark 21, from RDA, but then predominantly from the descriptive cataloging of rare materials RDA edition. So we considered what type of cataloging each element would be, how they should be recorded, whether or not they were mandatory, if they used a value encoding scheme or a string encoding scheme. And yeah, so we ended up with this. And this now serves two purposes for us. So it allows us to bring records up to this standard through the application of its various encoding schemes and recording methods. So when approaching new records or retrospective records, but critically here and in this context, it also allows us to develop an approach for addressing the level that our collection is at against this standard. So it's a means to coming up with an attempt to answer that original question about what proportion of the collection is at minimum. So having done this, we're then moving on to thinking about how we're going to appraise the collection against the standard. So this was done by thinking about how we could query the collection effectively. This is by no means a straightforward thing to do because there are a number of things we would want recorded if present, which would be possible to query on. So, for example, if we argued that a parallel title proper is mandatory if applicable, we would need to compare a volume to a record to know if there was a parallel title proper that should have been recorded, if you follow. However, we were able to come up with a number of criteria across the bibliographic and holding records to establish if we thought something was meeting a minimum. And then there are many ways you could actually implement this in your collection if you have such a standard. It would obviously be possible in Excel and maybe using something like OpenRefine. I think you could probably do it in MarcEdit or using things like QA catalog. But we decided to use Alma Analytics, which is the analytics tool available for Alma users, predominantly because it's dynamically updated from Alma daily, and also it allows you to write SQL queries to make something like this possible. I won't get too much into the weeds here with this, but essentially we converted our standard into a set of structured query statements, which checked for specific content. And as a first pass, this is fairly straightforward. So like just as an example that I've got on the screen here. So this is looking at whether or not the record has values for an extent of manifestation and dimensions of manifestation. So we can look there at the particular mark field that and the subfields that those should be in, which are the 300 mark field and then subfields A and C. And so we can write a statement that essentially looks at our records and asks, is there a value in that subfield? And are there, in this case, we've also included, does it not have a subfield P, which is an old, I think it's a UK mark code. So we're trying to say that that is indicative of the fact that something doesn't meet the standard if it has this older value in, and also if it doesn't have the subfields A and C. So hopefully you can see you can do some work there to sort of translate a standard into queries, and then you can kind of spit out a list of both the list of records and also aggregate records. And you could definitely take this further. You could look at things like if there was a subfield 300 subfield B, if there was one, did it have sets of terms that are controlled, for example, illustration or what have you, that might be from a value encoding scheme. We then ended up with a set of criteria and a proportion of the collection that meets the standard or doesn't at a high level, which you've got there, as well as a list of all the records that don't meet the standard and a consideration of why. So this then allows us to target records that fall below the standard, and we can then also further distinguish between records that can likely be looked at remotely, i.e. because they are missing publication information, which could potentially be passed from a copycat record, or if they need to be looked at physically because they're missing information such as size or dimensions. So from this information and with some approximation of how long each record will take to assess based on findings of other similar work, we can then start to look at how long it would take to bring the whole collection to a minimum standard, along with how much staff resource that would take. So this obviously is really useful in helping us plan and prioritize work over the medium term. So the final thing I wanted to just talk about is visualization. So and reporting. So we're yet to actually kick off the cataloging part of this project. So I've just spun up some dummy data for this. But essentially what we want to do is we want to look at how values are changing over time. Hopefully with the idea that as we work through the records, the number for the proportion of records below minimum will drop. But the challenge here is that ALMA analytics, as you may know, doesn't readily allow you to look at temporal data like this. It's a snapshot of the collections at any given moment. You can look at certain events over time, so fulfillment events, but you can't look at what the collection was like, how many items there were, how many holdings there were, et cetera, at different points in time. So we needed to take this outside the system. So like many organizations, we've started in the recent past to investigate the Power Platform of apps that Microsoft have made available to users. And so by combining Power Automate and Power BI, we are able to create a dashboard that can be embedded into a SharePoint site or indeed the web, if a web space is available, which can then be automatically updated on a schedule of our choosing. I'm happy to share how I've set all this up for anyone who's interested. You can email me or what have you. But essentially, you can schedule reports from ALMA Analytics to be sent to your inbox, and then you can use an automate flow, which will effectively take the attachments to your emails, will move them into a folder on SharePoint, and then you can use Power BI to kind of spin all these things together. So we've set this up to run monthly, but it could be run more frequently if desired, weekly or even daily, depending on what you're trying to do. So the final aspect of this then is you end up with your data in Power BI. And once it's in Power BI, I mean, the sky is kind of the limit in how you might want to visualize it. I've mocked up something here. And this is just a screenshot, but I have kind of got this here. So this is just our SharePoint. And hopefully you can see that it will allow you to, so for example, if we change to a different collection, these things move around and it's kind of nice and dynamic. And as I said, you can embed this in a site so it can be looked at without you having to show someone. They can just access it at any time. And as I said, there's loads you could do with Power BI. It's a very powerful tool. So yeah. Then in conclusion, so I think there's definitely limitations to this approach, obviously, but I think it gives us a way in and a way to track progress and prioritize resource, which obviously needs to be balanced against lots of other considerations. I think this whole bit of work has kind of revealed to me, at least, that there seems to be a shift towards local context being more significant in implementation and even setting of standards. There's an emphasis on communities of practice, setting agendas and making decisions about levels of cataloging. So it's interesting to me to think about where these are and how much we are talking to each other about these things. I think we could probably learn a lot from and looking at other communities of practice like archivists and art cataloguers, look what's happening there and the opportunities of learning for each other over this. And finally, just want to say that I think it's probably never been easier to learn how to do all this type of stuff. There's so much information out there. Library Carpentry is an excellent resource. Programming Historian is an excellent resource. Yeah, so that was really what we wanted to say. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, both of you. That was really fascinating. While people are thinking about their questions, I just have one to start off with, which is, so you've been, and at the end you were talking about communities of practice. How much do you kind of speak to the users of your material about what would help them to have in a catalogue record, and how that kind of affects what your minimum levels are?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, so we are engaged in and like informal, both like I guess there's like informal and formal consultations with users. So we've had kind of formal, like more like surveys that have been kind of sent around in the past for internal staff users with like public and external users. I guess it's like predominantly more kind of like informal, yeah, just sort of like chatting while you're at the desk type of thing. And so I would say it definitely does feed in. I suppose the challenge is obviously that, like, with all this type of work, the scale is just enormous and kind of so intimidating. And so that's why I think it's interesting to think about both trying to do this type of almost like large scale work to try and make kind of quite big changes quite quickly, but also, like, at the same time coming up with ways of being able to prioritize collections as well that could do with and would be, that are more well used perhaps, that could then justifiably have much more time spent on the records. Because obviously all these records that we're talking about here, all this work that we've done, it's none of these records that are like just at this bare minimum we would say are good records, really. They're acceptable. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything, Grace.
You're on mute, Grace.
Yeah, not anymore. No, I think Ben's covered everything pretty thoroughly there.
Had a couple more questions come in. So one saying, Ben, are you able to share some of the resources that you mentioned and how to learn all of this? That would be one that we might have to do offline, but if you can kind of quickly list something that might be helpful, that would be great.
Yeah, totally. So I think that, like, there's obviously a lot of aspects to doing this to some extent, but I would say, like I was trying to say at the end there, I think, yeah, you can be, if you have a problem to solve, I think that's always the best way of trying to learn how to do something when it comes to these types of things, because analytics is a totally it's a part of Alma that's like updated from Alma, but it's not, you can't break anything by doing things in analytics. It's completely separate. So you can, there's the capacity for a lot of experimentation there. There's stuff more to do with Automate Power BI. I think because those are not library specific products, obviously, there's tons of information out there in relation to how, like just conventional, like corporate businesses use these products, and there's all sorts of information, like really, really good YouTube channels about how to do all sorts of stuff in relation to like Power BI particularly. And then obviously, like, depending on your point of view and your approach, the embedded and or external AIs are obviously like very good and very useful in relation to answering these types of questions about, basically how to do a small amount of coding.
Great. There's also a question: how long has it taken you to get to this stage?
I don't know, Grace.
It's really only been a couple of months. Only a couple of months, but I think a lot of it has been refining how to prioritize what we think is important, and that comes not just from talking to our users, but also our experience with knowing our own collection and that sort of thing. So historically, what would annoy me if I were looking for a rare book and I couldn't find it? One of the things that we were focusing on was ellipses in the middle. So that might be something so a lot of it has been refining the process and trying to turn ideas into something feasible, I guess. Just a few months, but lots of work to do.
I've got another question. How much have you been able to use the visualizations and advocacy so far? It's a lot of work, so it'd be good to know how it's being used.
Sure. Well, I think, because as I said, that the visualization really for this was just a demo for this presentation, right. in that we haven't actually started doing the work we've done has been in relation to devising the standard, evaluating all the other standards, writing the SQL, doing the analytics side of it, like in terms of actually like doing the work and then doing the visualization, then that having kind of being influential. I would say for this project particularly, it's not real data, but I would say that in other areas and other projects I'm working on and other things I've done, I think it is really powerful in that if you can, I don't know, you don't want to be reductive, but if you can show numbers, if you can, you know, people are impressed by charts and stuff, like it's kind of like maybe sad in a way, but it's true. And so I would say particularly like advocating for the library outside of the library, to you know, administrators, to more, you know, bureaucratic position, whatever, then this business information, that's what Power BI stands for, is, you know, a language that, for better or worse, we do have to engage in.
We have a question. Can you explain what SQL is in a for dummies kind of way?
Sure. I mean, maybe. It's basically it's a syntax that's used to query databases. So that's all it is. So it's just like sets of terms that you could use to write code that allows you to return bits of information from a database. So you can obviously do that through other means, and often you're querying a database via a user interface, so you're clicking buttons and things are happening. But structured query language is basically the language that sits behind that and allows you to effectively write more precise, you know, query a database more precisely.
Yeah, that was, it's the kind of thing that I'm aware of, but it's always good to know more. So yeah, I've been really grateful to hear about this work. We've got a comment in the chat from Andrea Hart, who says that just to add that future work will look into developing a core and then advanced standard, which would then consider discoverability and access. Books that go through the metadata team, though, are always catalogued to the high standard, not just minimum. And then we've got a couple of comments. Incredible piece of work, I'm very impressed. And another one, which is to say, this is really useful to institutes like ours with a lot of extremely suspect data from retro conversion projects. I think a lot of us can sympathise with that. Any more for any more? Or I thank Ben and Grace. I think we will move on, but thank you so much for opening the conference. It was a really thought-provoking and interesting paper.
Thank you.
So we are moving on now to our second speaker, who is Ross Melvin from SOAS, and he is talking about transforming the SOAS manuscript metadata approaches to complex catalogue data.
Oh. Let's see. Can you see that okay? Or... Hello?
I can just see a black screen at the moment.
Oh no. It says I'm sharing my screen, so I'm not quite sure what's happening there. Let's try that again. How about now?
I can see that now.
Yeah? Okay, wonderful. Well, if that's working for everyone, then I'll try and proceed. Okay, so hello. Thank you very much to Tanya and to Ben and Grace for a very interesting presentation. My name's Ross, and I work at SOAS in the Special Collections Department. So I'll just give a sort of brief overview of the holdings and then get into the nature of the project that we're engaged in at the moment. So SOAS's Special Collections Department holds about 2,000 manuscripts in hundreds of different languages. Now, the majority of these were acquired in the first half of the 20th century. And of course, gradually, with the passage of time, this physical material has generated a sort of complex palimpsest of description and metadata surrounding it. This collection metadata had gradually become extremely disordered and opaque, and it was severely limiting the accessibility of what is undoubtedly a very rich collection of material. SOAS's manuscript sequence, with its accession numbers given an MS prefix, had developed on, I think it's fair to say, quite an ad hoc basis, right? So many non-manuscript items were given MS prefixes simply by dint of there being no more suitable classification for them at the time. And as sector colleagues well know, the catalogue information which accrues over such a long period appears in a huge array of different forms, basically, right? So card catalogue collections, various print catalogues focusing on particular parts of the sequence, as well as the full range of different types of digital data. So when all this comes to be digitized, the mixture of sources results in a highly complex data set, one which contains a huge range of different standards and approaches folded within it. Now, although this common issue of the legacy data naturally presents very serious difficulties, it is nevertheless the fruit of decades of engagement with the collection, and it contains much of enormous value. So what was needed for us institutionally was to consolidate and to represent this catalogue information. Oh, it's my computer crashing. Are you still okay? Sorry, my computer just keeps cutting out a little bit. Okay, so next slide. So in the last year or so, SOAS's Special Collections identified the development of a bespoke manuscript database as the key step towards improving the discoverability and research value of the manuscript holdings. The transfer to a new AMS provided the ideal opportunity for a serious rethink about how the manuscript metadata would best be displayed to users. Talks with the company Metadatis about a new Apexio-based database were ongoing. So an overhaul of the metadata to populate it with was the natural complementary project. They also aimed to enrich the catalogue wherever possible with more information, particularly about the provenance of the manuscripts. The principal aim of the project, which is still very much ongoing, is to transform this legacy metadata into a new standard, one informed both by sector best practice, but also by our specific institutional needs. Such a transformation, done correctly, will greatly enhance the research value of the collection, and we were keen to explore the ways in which any workflow developed might be streamlined with the use of digital tools. So at the beginning of the project, the manuscript metadata had been amalgamated into a single spreadsheet. And amongst the sources which composed it are, of course, the familiar old card catalogue data, OCR'd and digitized, along with various dedicated print catalogues which covered particular parts of the sequence. And in addition, the majority of what we might call the Islamic manuscripts had also been catalogued as part of the Firist initiative. So there was also this structured TEI XML data. Now, this was largely created by the then Middle East librarian at SOAS, Peter Colvin, and these entries were created through first principles cataloguing by Peter, but combined where possible with reference to prior catalogue information. However, with no finished source for the Persian manuscripts, Peter also drew on unfinished galley proofs archived at SOAS of a catalogue of the Perso-Arabic material, which was begun by Arthur Arbery in the 1930s. The catalogue sadly was never finished, but I hope you can see how underlying some of this apparently uniform or single source data can be found further hidden sources or folded up inside it. And another crucial one I'd like to mention is the Swahili manuscript project data, right? So this was created as part of a Leverhulme funded project in the early noughties, and it is by far the most expansive of any of our sources. It preserves within it crucial knowledge from East African scholars regarding provenance of the items and also very specific dialectical forms of the Swahili language, which are found in the material itself. However, I will say this Swahili project was conceived mostly with these sort of linguistic and literary historical research goals in mind. And that means that it combines this complexity and depth of information with a rationale which is very different from, say, the card catalogue entries. Now, as will hopefully be clear from this sort of brief overview of the constitutive sources, the strands which compose the dataset vary enormously in structure and approach. So our project's aim then was to develop a new metadata standard and to harmonize all these discordant and even contradictory sources into an elegant and functional new format. So whilst I was puzzling all this out, I found it very useful to imagine the process diachronically. So that is to imagine a sort of three-phase temporal progression for our data set. And clarifying these three stages gives us a sort of roadmap for the project, right? So beginning with the original sources of the data, then moving into its present amalgamation in the form that we now find it, and then ideally finishing in the desired harmonized data set, right? In order to effectively deal with the data as it now is, it was crucial to understand these two things, both the past of the information, which is found in the data set, the elements composing the data, as well as the historical contexts and rationales involved in their creation, and of course, the projected future of the data. So the ideal form of new standard, which would be both in line with sector best practice, but also tailored specifically to SOAS's collection. So let us begin with the present form, with the data as found in the middle there. Before beginning to disentangle the myriad sources and overwriting that we found there, we needed to resolve a large amount of redundant material which was within the data set. So this ad hoc development of the MS sequence had naturally left a great deal of residual data pertaining to items which weren't even manuscripts. So although this involved us in a great deal of edge cases and grey areas, by sort of gradually and methodically removing such redundant entries as we were sure about, we were able to pare the data set down by about sort of 30 to 40%. And of course, this has a sort of crucial data transformation rationale as well, because it greatly facilitates any manipulation of the data that you're trying to do. In addition, by explicitly focusing on one type of material in a collection in which many things of a myriad form have been classified together, in this way one can more effectively devise and apply the appropriate new standards, as there aren't any sort of out-of-place objects which need to be forced into a sort of Procrustean bed. So with the newly reduced and rationalized data set, we could then begin to disentangle its composing strands. As I mentioned before, much of the information which made up this legacy data set derives ultimately from print publications of various kinds. As a result, a great deal of the entries have structural conventions which are not digitally native at all. Nevertheless, every source does, or nearly every source, follows a cataloging syntax of some kind, right? So by analyzing closely their conventions and systems of abbreviation, it was possible to create detailed abstracts of the way in which all these different sources are formally structured. Here, paying very close attention to prefatory material and abbreviation keys in the catalogs themselves proved very, very helpful. And using such information, it was possible to create schemas which reproduce the cataloging syntax underlying each of the individual sources. Yeah. So, whilst investigating these historical dimensions of the dataset, an eye was also kept on the future form that we wanted the data to take. So, whilst devising its new schema, SOAS took inspiration from the MS description TEI element, tweaking it, of course, for our institutional needs. But one of our key goals in the project was standardization, of course. So deeper integration of authority controls and other measures so as to greatly sort of bolster the collection's discoverability and research value. However, this drive towards standardization poses obviously particular challenges for a collection with such a wide range of languages and dating systems as SOAS is. So to take the case of dates, for example, our manuscripts record dates using a range of culturally of different culturally specific calendrical systems. However, of course, to maximize its utility, the manuscript catalogue needs to be searchable by date in a uniform fashion. So this dictated the use of Gregorian as the native calendar of the catalogue, but with scrupulous recording of dates in original calendrical systems recorded within the metadata itself. When it comes to the data transformation itself, then, it's obviously crucial to ensure the uniformity of structure within the data, which will be able to support this standardization goal. And this is all the more so in the face of the sort of multilingual and multi-calendrical complexity of a collection like SOAS's. So to one of the sort of questions of the day that Tanya mentioned, how then might digital tools like AI be used to support processes like these? And what problems might arise from their use in such a context? Of course, AI does have very serious limitations for a task like this, and perhaps it's best to acknowledge them upfront. In matters of detail, such language models are frequently unreliable, to put it very mildly, and left unconstrained, data fabrication is remarkably common. For a sector where scholarly accuracy is so central, this is obviously a pronounced concern. There's also a more prosaic issue, which is posed by processing limitations of the models as they stand presently. Although our sample is only sort of a megabyte or two in size, our legacy dataset contains far too many complex lines of text to be sort of effectively processed by anything but the most expensive and energy intensive of AI models. So let's be clear-eyed about this. AI will at present, I think, provide no easy solution for a legacy data issue like SOAS is. It certainly can't be fed the data as it's found and expected to produce something functional. But neither is it to be totally abhorred, I think. Strictly monitored and given a very circumscribed field of action, I would argue that it can assist usefully with data transformations like this. So we settled on a middle path. A carefully constrained AI model would be used to assist in coding a series of bespoke scripts, in this case using Python code, which would then be able to directly transform and remap our catalog data in its sort of XML form. This way, we were able to evade the data cache limitation entirely, but most crucially, this also allows us to insulate the metadata from data fabrication, right? As the Python script is unable to extrapolate and invent in the way that the language models are designed to. So with these provisos in mind, we can follow the approach through. With our sufficiently clean data set and our guides to the formal construction of the historic data sources, the AI model can be taught to work out where it will find different types of information within a given entry and how to interpret and expand the abbreviations found there. Then, the place in the new standard structure where each type of information belongs can be very precisely defined. So to give an example, if the script sees ff.90, it transforms that to 90 folios and then maps this detail to the physical extent field of the finished standard, right? So the AI model then expresses these sets of transformation rules as Python script, which can then itself be further refined and worked upon. And to reiterate, by proceeding in this way, the risk of data fabrication is heavily controlled. The AI is only responsible for structuring the transformation rules, which are then expressed in code, right? This plays to the strengths of the language processing model, whilst avoiding the risk of it making judgment calls which are uncalled for about how to process the complex data. The actual transformation itself takes place entirely outside of the AI model, and it happens entirely mechanically on the basis of very precisely defined rules and operations. However, one can still use the AI model to test the efficacy of the transformation rules. And in this way, one can troubleshoot and iteratively refine these rules. So, for example, one can feed the model the various possible combinations of sources found in the dataset in order to test its transformations and isolate any recurring issues. So in closing, I'd like to highlight one crucial advantage of this sort of historical approach, as you might call it, to legacy datasets. As a result of approaching things in this way, we can encode this nuanced understanding of our sources into the entries themselves. This way, an audit train can be built directly into the metadata. So every record documents which sources constitute its metadata, and this makes the underlying structure visible for future reference. Through measures like this, it's our hope that the data can be future-proof to an extent at least, and that such errors or contradictions as appear can be traced to their respective sources in many cases, right? By proceeding in this way, this precious institutional knowledge about services collection can be consolidated for the future in a form which is both flexible and fit for purpose. But I'm keen to underline that this remains very much a work in progress, and such complex data sets are obviously very common within the sector. So I'll greatly look forward to learning what I can from the approaches proposed by other speakers. And I provide my email if anyone, I'd be very happy to be contacted with any questions also. So I'll hand back over to Tanya now.
Thanks so much, Ross. I learned loads from that. To kick us off, so you mentioned a bit about the issue of dating being different across obviously different cultures, and that you were having to kind of use different systems, but also the Gregorian system. Did you come across any issues with AI being sort of European centric and introducing errors from that kind of perspective, or was that not really an issue? Or you're on mute.
Quite right. The majority of cases within our data, we might take the example of South Asia. Say the SACA system was one of the calendrical systems that we had to integrate, right? Now, it's not actually some of the calendrical systems. SACA has the advantage that it has been quite precisely calculated at the beginning of the era. So it is kind of quite a simple matter insofar as you give it the corresponding beginning of the era, and then it just calculates it back based on the Gregorian. So there's not that much room for AI's cultural, blind spots to enter into it. I will say, though, obviously there are other calendrical systems where their usages historically have not actually been fully structured in a sort of final way, such that it's not really possible to exactly calculate a Gregorian date. And in these cases, you have default to a sort of 17th century date, say, and you can set a range within the Gregorian. So you would say, 1600 to 1699, and that retains the searchability of the catalogue, but without sort of being overconfident about the precision with which you're able to calculate the dates. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does.
I apologize for all the technical quirks I've been having as well. My computer keeps sort of disappearing.
I have one more question while other people are thinking. So I noticed that you have Apexio as your category. We are also just moving on to Apexio. Can you talk a bit about, I'm presuming that's quite a new thing. Can you talk a bit about whether that was kind of selected because it was more helpful for this kind of, how did you kind of go about selecting a new archives management system, and were you kind of thinking about this sort of thing while you were planning?
So the point at which I entered the project, a transfer to Apexio had already been made, and the decision was very much with the head of special collections and with Alex Kither, the special collections curator, and it was very much his wheelhouse in terms of choosing the sort of sources for the new standards, and the decision making about large scale software transfers is not really something that I'd be able to address directly, I have to say. But Epexio certainly has many advantages, one of which is that we've been able to have sort of direct dialogue with them about adjusting the model for our specific institutional needs, particularly in the way that it displays and in the sort of fields that we have in order to best capture attributes of our manuscripts.
Great. We have a question in the chat. Super interesting. Thanks, Ross. So you use generative AI to help write and iterate the Python code, which was largely then algorithmic in application, or did you modify something like DZ match, like a locally modified deep neural network?
Oh, that's a lot of very technical terminology there that
Yes.
I'm not sure I entirely follow, to be perfectly honest. My experience is mainly with the use of the AI model to co-create Python code. I'm somewhat new to that field, but as the former speaker said, one of the best ways to sort of get to grips with new systems is to have a knotty problem, right? But no, I haven't. I'm not familiar with DZ match, whatever that is. I'm not sure about that. Sorry, Ben. I know you're much more technical in your approach.
I always feel like we need to get Ben back to explain what you mean.
Yeah, Ben, speak out.
Well, no, just sorry. I just wondered exactly what you've done. But DZ match is a thing that the Living with Machines group made, which is comes. I think are they UCL Kings? But it's I haven't used it, but I just was interested if this was an application of it. But in theory, basically, what it is like it's something like doing what you've done. It sounds like, but using an actual deep neural network that you yourself can then modify and use your own data to sort of train. It's I don't know.
Right, okay.
If you see what I mean, as opposed to using.
No, I do. So what sort of modifications can you make to the neural network?
So you can basically feed it. You can effectively train it by giving it pairs of things that are related, and then using that to then train things that you then give it two different sets of things, and it tries to find the relationships effectively. I think that's, to put it very simply, but yeah. But as I said, I haven't actually used it. I'm just
right. Well, no, that sounds like something to look into for sure. And where did you say it was integrated? KCL, was it? Or?
I think it's Kings. It's the Living with Machines group, the people who've made it, they put out loads of stuff. Okay. It's loads of tools for digital humanities and stuff.
Sure.
Living with Machines was a Alan Turing Institute project, wasn't it, with lots of partners, including the BL?
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right, great. Thanks very much for that, then.
I'm just double checking that there's no other in the Q&A at the moment.
I'm aware we're slightly over time, perhaps.
Yeah,
as well, but...
I think. Thank you so much, Ross. I think we've all
I provide my email.
If
anyone would like to follow up, then I'm more than happy to do so.
Great. So we're going to move on to our next paper, which is Alison Haslar, Kim Taylor and Trevor Howe of the University of Leeds. And they'll be talking about embracing new approaches to enhance discoverability and the use of rare print materials at the University of Leeds. And this is a recorded paper, but they are present to answer questions at the end. So we're going to launch into the recording.
Thank you for inviting us to present at this year's conference. My name is Kim Taylor. Along with my colleagues Alison Haslar and Trevor Howe, I work as part of the metadata and discovery team at the University of Leeds, where a large part of our work involves supporting discoverability and use of the significant collections of rare print materials held by the university. Our presentation will discuss historical challenges in this work, as well as some new approaches we have investigated in the past 2 years, with the hopes that it might provide guidance and/or inspiration to others who find themselves in similar scenarios. Like other institutions, many of our rare print materials comprise parts of larger archival collections. The challenges we have grappled with for some time exist for both staff who catalog these materials and users who want to engage with them. And one of those challenges is the two-pronged approach in managing and displaying bibliographic metadata. At Leeds, we catalog rare print in ALMA, which then displays in Primo VE, but the metadata is also exported from ALMA to the EMU content management system, where it surfaces again on a bespoke web interface maintained by our cultural collections. The situation can create confusion for users, especially in terms of accuracy, as the metadata that surfaces on the EMU side loses its ability to link to external data sources, such as Library of Congress, Wikidata, and others. Other difficulties include defining relationships in MARC, whether between specific print materials and the collections they belong to, or between works contained in bound with volumes. Even more impactful upon rare print cataloging, however, is the challenge of recording and displaying copy-specific information that is so vital to users of these materials. In our presentation, Trevor will first explore the method he developed to create links between bibliographic records and the greater archival collections they belong to. And we will then look at BibFrame and what we see as its noteworthy advantage over MARC in terms of recording copy-specific details. My colleague Allison will then discuss bound with relationships and how the BibFrame model also surpasses MARC in accurately defining these relationships. And finally, we will give our impressions of what this work has meant in terms of both management and discovery of rare print materials at Leeds, how we see it shaping our future work, and why the journey so far has been worth the effort. And with that, I'll hand over to Trevor.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, so at Leeds, we catalogue the rare print monographs in ALMA, and every week those records are exported to EMU. Whereas non-monographic materials such as archives and physical objects is catalogued in EMU. These records are also displayed in Library Search, which is our public name for Primo, although they're not exported to ALMA. EMU records displayed on the Cultural Collections website also include a link to that record in Library Search, but there's no reciprocal link from Library Search back to EMU. If you run a search in Primo and your results include some content that is part of our cultural collections, you'll be invited to log in to request access, such as you can see with this yellow bar. But when you do that, you will then find that you still can't place a request in Library Search. This is because cultural collections materials are requested from the EMU website and not through Library Search. So if you wanted to get access to this book, you would have to go to the Cultural Collections website and repeat your search. This issue came up in a conversation between our metadata team and Cultural Collections several months ago, and I wondered if there was some ALMA functionality that we could use that would make it possible to link from Library Search to EMU. And it turns out there is. It's called a General Electronic Service, or GES, and one of the things it can do is take an attribute from the currently displayed record and reuse it, for example, in a search URL. After a bit of experimentation, I found that I could create an EMU search URL using the ALMA Bibliographic Record Identifier, or MMSID. I added this to the GES and limited it to records where there was a cultural collections location. Otherwise, records that were only in our main collection would display an EMU search link, and it wouldn't actually result in an EMU record. And this link displays with a standard text in the Primo search results. The link is displayed whether or not someone is logged into Library Search, which makes it available for external users of our cultural collections. And following the link will take you to the EMU page for this title, and will show the 2 copies we have of this book. Soon after we had made the title level links live in Library Search, we came to the realization that it could be helpful to provide some context to these titles by linking to the collections they belong to. Our first thought was to use another general electronic service to generate the link. So we created a local field with the EMU collection number in subfield A and further subfields to identify the collection by name to give a bit more context to people looking at the MARC record. The GES uses the collection number to generate the EMU URL and displays the link to it next to the one for title, as you can see here. This information in the local field is the same for every title in a given collection, so it's easy to add them to the records in bulk. And you can add more than one instance of the local field if a title has items in more than one collection. When we started testing, we found that the link worked really well for titles that are in only one collection like this one. But if a title has items in multiple collections, like this example, we get a link to only one of them. And since the GES uses the same text for the link no matter which collection it's going to, it's not possible to say which collection this link belongs to. So it was back to the drawing board. However, we did come up with a way to provide links to as many collections as we needed and to display the names of the collections. We're still testing this, but the solution we've come up with uses an 856 field for each collection. We add the collection URL in subfield U and the collection name in subfield Z, which will be displayed as the link text, as you can see at the bottom of the screen here. We've got full control over the content of the link text, so we can specify exactly which collection we're linking to. The URL and the link text will be the same for every item in the collection, so it's easy to add them in bulk. And the 856 field is repeatable, so we shouldn't run into any problems with titles that have items in multiple collections. However, the 856 field is displayed in the links section of the display, which for us is located at the bottom of the record, while the general electronic service links are displayed at the top. And with that, I'll hand over to Kim to introduce our BIP framework.
Thanks, Trevor. So our BIP framework came about as a result of the three of us joining the Ex Libris IGLU Link Data Focus Group in July 2023. This is an international group of Ex Libris users who are working not only in the Sinopia editor, but more recently in Ex Libris's own BibFrame editor within ALMA. As mentioned, we wanted primarily to investigate the benefits of BibFrame over MARC for recording and displaying copy-specific information for rare print materials. But in addition, the three of us are also involved in a digital initiative at Leeds using the linked art data model to facilitate management of metadata for archival and rare print materials. And our work has also shown that metadata created in BibFrame is far simpler and more intuitive to map to this new data model than from MARC. Many of you will be quite familiar with the long-standing challenges of copy-specific information in MARC. Approaches will vary by institution, but the end result is essentially the same in terms of discoverability for the user. That is, users will see one bibliographic record that may contain copy-specific description relevant to only one or perhaps more of possibly several physical copies held by an institution, often leading to confusion for the user as to which copy the description relates to. Being limited by the flat nature of MARC can present tremendous challenges to researchers seeking to identify works based on provenance, bindings, or any other unique characteristics. BibFrame allows us to clearly separate the item level description from both the work and the instance. Most of you will likely have seen this graphic many times, but it is helpful in understanding how the BibFrame 2.0 model works. It's an entity-based model as opposed to MARC being a record-based model and uses the RDF classes of work, instance, and item. The work being the highest level in the model and representing the abstract concept of the resource. The instance is the embodiment of the work, whether physical or virtual, and can mean things like translations or editions. And then there's the item. which is possibly the most important to the rare materials community, and that is the level at which copy-specific information is recorded. This slide illustrates how we record copy-specific metadata at LEEDS, both in the MARC model and the BibFrame model. It's using a trade catalog from the early 1800s. And on the left, we have examples of copy-specific fields that describe unique bindings, presence of tipped-in plates for this book. And on the right is an example from Sinopia using the PCC BibFrame item template for monographs. And even though we typically include reference to the class mark of the specific item that a given note pertains to in the mark field, it isn't always possible to do, as for instance with 700 fields where we are designating former owners or binders. And when there's a copy specific field pointing to multiple items held at LEEDS, it can be challenging for users to decipher which field applies to the copy they seek. And that is where, again, BibFrame comes in. The BibFrame template allows specific elements within note fields to be recorded separately, and it also allows catalogers to identify the type of note, using, in this example, the note type of binding from the Library of Congress BibFrame ontology. And this is very helpful for users when they're seeking materials by type of bindings or really any other copy-specific details. It provides them the ability to easily identify and select these unique copies based on their research needs. While this is already a vast improvement over the one-size-fits-all approach in MARC, it is only the first step. And at LEEDS, we've recently moved on from the PCC item template to our own templates. These are based on those created by the Rare Materials Affinity Group using the Art and Rare Materials extension, as Trevor will now show.
Okay, so the linked open data focus group was introduced to Stanford's Sinopia environment that we'd be using to do our first experiments in creating BibFrame records. Once we were given access to Sinopia, we started exploring and creating test records using the templates provided by the PCC. This slide shows parts of the work and instance records we created based on a title from our Bedford collection. One of the advantages of the Sinopia templates we've been using is that we've been strongly encouraged to incorporate linked data elements through both lookups and controlled vocabulary lists. And this is part of the item record showing copy-specific information that in the MARC bibliographic record was recorded in the 700 and 710 fields for the former owners, and the custodial history was in a 561 note. Work and instance records that have been created in Sinopia can be imported into our Alma sandbox with an API, but item records created in Sinopia can't currently be imported into Sinopia. However, it is possible to use Alma's existing functionality for items, orders, and circulation with BibFrame records. You can display the RDF XML views of both the instance and work record, and there's the option to create on-the-fly MARC conversions. Alma has had for several years the ability to convert MARC records to BibFrame. So now there's conversions in both ways, and this is based on a Library of Congress methodology. And you can export records out of Alma in either BibFrame or MARC formats. And in Primo, the display is a merger of the work and instance records, and you can display the source record, which will give you the XML view of the instance record. Once we were comfortable creating records in Sinopia, we started looking at the templates to see what had already been done for special collections type materials. We were particularly interested in recording copy-specific information and learning how BibFrame handles bound widths. We found a suite of RMAG templates, some of them are shown on this slide, that would let us record copy-specific information in individual elements. It's possible to use these RMAG templates for items alongside our PCC-based work and instance templates, as Sinopia is quite happy for you to mix and match different styles of template. On this slide, you can see part of the RMAG item record template. On the left is shown the section that records information about people or organizations that were linked to that specific copy, such as former owners. And on the right is the section of the template that covers 10 different types of markings that could be represented. Here is an example of one of the records we created with this item template. On the left, we have information about a former owner, including name, Wikidata URI, and role as former owner. And on the right, we have a description of the book plate from the front of the book with information about the person associated with it. And in the second example, which is another copy of the same book, we have information about its own former owner. This time the URI is for a Library of Congress name authority. And on the right, we have a description of an enclosure, followed by information about how we acquired this copy. We found the RMAG item templates let us record copy-specific information in great detail, and we would have liked to have been able to bring them in these item records into Elmer as well. And I'll now hand over to Alison to talk about our experiences with bound widths.
Thanks, Trevor. So yes, I'm going to be talking about bound width volumes and how we believe that BibFrame provides an improvement over MARC when defining relationships between different works within a single volume. So bound width volumes make up a considerable proportion of our cultural collections here at Leeds. In fact, a physical title search I ran last week for these materials brought back almost 10,000 such volumes. This slide shows our current approach in MARC. It shows one of our bound width works from our cultural collections. The MARC record represents the first of 5 titles bound together. Our current local practice for cataloguing bound width relies on the use of the 501 MARC note field to describe the relationship between the separately issued items. We also add 774 linking fields for each of the other 4 items. To improve user discovery, we add a public note to the item record that lists all the works contained within the volume. However, this approach presents a challenge because a single bibliographic record might represent a work that appears in multiple bound width volumes. A particular title could be the host record for one volume, while also being a guest record in another. To solve this, we've added a prefix to the 501 note, which includes a call number and barcode to help distinguish between the different items. So this slide shows how the same record appears in Primo. And as you can see, it's immediately obvious that that it might not be a bound width volume. The bound width information is only revealed after the user clicks the down arrow. Prior to migrating to Alma, our local practice was to put all copy-specific and bound width information into the item record public note. However, this approach presents a challenge. First, this information is not searchable in Primo. This means a user can't search for details about a book plate, unique marking, binding, or signature, making it much harder to find copy-specific details. Second, the display itself is a problem. And even though the field has a generous 4,000 character limit, the text can be squashed into a single visually dense block, especially when there is a lot of information. There are significant issues when viewing these bound width records in EMU. The primary problem is that only the first title of a bound width, the host record, is discoverable in EMU. If a user searches for any of the guest records in the volume, they will not be able to find it. The only information we have for any of the guest records comes from the Alma item record public note, which is extremely sparse, consisting of usually only the creator, the title, and the publication year. This is a major gap in our search functionality, and we are actively searching for a solution for all bound width volumes created after 2019. I'll now turn my attention to how we would create BibFrame bound width records in Sinopia. So the good news is that we didn't have to create any new templates from scratch. We discovered 2 bound width templates already available in both the Sinopia stage and dev environments. And these have been created by the Harry Ransom Centre using the Art and Rare Materials ARM BibFrame ontology. Unfortunately, we found both sets of templates were not fully functional due to some missing dependencies. And so we contacted Callie Mathios, the Link Data Community Outreach Librarian, who confirmed that the issue lay with one of the nested templates, and he would like to express a huge thank you to Callie, as she was then able to resolve the issue for us in Sinopia stage. However, since we need to export our BibFrame records to Alma through the Sinopia dev environment, we had to copy the updated templates and save them, and we saved them as our own Leeds bound with templates. So what did this involve? Unfortunately, there is no simple way to copy and paste templates from one Sinopia environment to another. So for us, that meant side-by-side manual copying of the Sinopia stage template and recreating the many nested templates within. This took us several hours to complete, and with a total of 26 nested templates. And although this was a manual process, it did help to reinforce our understanding of BibFrame and how the templates in Sinopia work. Okay, so this slide shows the process for cataloging a BibFrame bound-with record in Sinopia. So the work in the instance is created as for monographs, as per Trevor's earlier slides. Then we have the 2 additional bound-with templates, which are necessary for creating the items. So for each of the individual titles in the bound-with, as well as the bound-with collection item. This describes the physical item. The end process results in individual item records for all the titles within the volume and which are linked to the bound-with collection item and also to each other. The slide shows one of our bound-with volume item records, which has the title Municipal Records. And this is part of a bound-with volume with a spine title, Helps for Students of History. The section Item Of links the item record to the manifestation instance. The section Next Item in the bound-with is self-explanatory and indicates the next item in sequential order in the bound-with. The item template then moves to the item's dimensions to include measurement. Control terms are used. Here, the physical attributes facet of Getty AAT, and a high level of granularity is possible. If you hover the mouse over the blue information icon, you'll see a little guidance pop up. And towards the bottom of the record is where we hold the admin metadata, where the cataloger ID, the date of cataloging, and institution is added. And finally, the last part of the record holds information about the encoding level, description convention, as well as language of cataloging. And so once all the items for the constituent parts have been added, the Leeds bound collection item is now created. And for this particular example, we have the title as Helps for Students of History, and this appears on the spine title. Next is the Is Composed Of section is used to link all the items contained within the bound-with. The physical location details for the item is also entered here. Shelf mark is added. The location code and the loan policy is added. Markings and dimensions for the bound-with volume are added. In this example here, we have a book plate. And now I will pass over to Trevor, who's going to be talking about the Alma BibFrame form editor.
Thank you. Okay, so we started our BibFrame journey using the Sinopia editor and importing records into Alma. But Ex Libris has been working on its own linked data editor, and we've been able to be involved since the earliest development releases and provide feedback to help with the development. It is now possible to use the editor to create BibFrame records for works and instances with BibFrame item records in Ex Libris's development plans. And there's a template manager where you can define the structure of a record. On the right is an example of a work template that was based on a PCC template we'd been using in Sinopia. And here is an example of a work record that was created with that template. Alma and Sinopia are not the only BibFrame editing options. Share VDE has an editor called Cricut. The Library of Congress has Marva and now Marva Quartz, which integrates with Folio. And OCLC has also started working on its own editor. And with that, I'll hand back to Alison.
Thank you. So, coming to our final slides. So, as we've discussed, cataloguing rare print materials presents a number of challenges, particularly when capturing the rich copy-specific information. We've developed a few local solutions, and we see an even more promising path forward with BibFrame. To address some of the challenges, we implemented several improvements to make it easier for our users. We created structured notes within the bibliographic records to clearly link the physical copy information to the correct item. We built a bridge between the two systems with the GES, allowing users to view and interact with the item on the Cultural Collections website with a single click. We added clickable links to display the full Cultural Collections hierarchy, taking users directly to the top-level collection record in EMU. We believe BibFrame offers a more appropriate model for describing rare print materials. The BibFrame work, instance, and item model allow us to describe the unique physical attributes, such as the annotations, the bindings, the provenance, that are so crucial for our cultural collections, without having to rely on convoluted notes and local workarounds. BibFrame provides clarity with the use of URIs and PIDs instead of text strings. And this in turn unlocks the potential for linking our data to external sources, making our records richer and more discoverable beyond the library catalogue. We've been putting this into practice by using the Sinopia BibFrame editor to create Leeds templates for rare print materials. Our involvement with the Igloo Link Data Focus Group, and especially with the invaluable insights from Heather Pretty, Memorial University of Newfoundland, and Kyla Jemison, University of Toronto Libraries, has been essential to our journey. We're not claiming that BibFrame is perfect. There are still numerous challenges, vendor and community adoption, as well as system integration. But for describing rare or unique items with rich copy-specific metadata, BibFrame provides a far better fit than MARC. In short, BibFrame enables us to move away from not just recording information about things, to modeling the meaningful relationships between them. And that's exactly what our special collections deserve. Thank you. Our emails are up there. So yes, we've also included a few useful BibFrame resources, but please do feel free to reach out to any of us to discuss anything that we've mentioned today. And we can also put you in touch with the Ex Libris Link Data Focus Group as well. So thank you.
So I'm hoping that we have the speakers with us. Here's Alison. Great, you're all here. So we do have 3 questions already in the chat. So the first one is, what was the learning curve with Sinopia and how many people were involved in the process? Just to take that.
So I'll take that one. So it's just the 3 of us in the team who are focused on the linked data. For training, well, goodness. So we had the support of the Linked Data Focus Group, the Igloo group. So we have monthly online meetings. As I mentioned in the presentation as well, we also have a monthly, like a subgroup with Toronto and Newfoundland universities, and that's been really helpful. As part of the training, we did the PCC training. We used the training materials from the PCC. And I think just before we started as well, Penn State gave a really good demonstration of creating records in Sinopia. So we had that sort of like foundation first of all, and it really just I'd say, I don't know if you agree, Trevor and Kim, that it was just really good to have that support, because we were so keen to start. We heard great things about linked data and BibFrame, but actually getting started from the very basic bottom step was quite a challenge. So yeah, really happy to join a group like Igloo.
We've got a clarification question. So Sinopia itself doesn't directly display in Primo, but you import the records to Alma. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Penn University, one of their IT people created an API to link from Sinopia to Alma for the participating libraries. So we can bring the records. Originally, it was into our sandbox, and there the work and instance records display in Primo. Unfortunately, so far we can't bring the item records from Sinopia into Alma. But with the Alma editor that's being developed, let's sort of hope that there will be item records available there, and that then they will be displayed in Primo. There is also, Xlibris had worked on their own way of importing BibFrame records into Alma. They've got their own documentation about how that works, but I think it's fairly similar to the API we've been using with Sinopia.
We've got a kind of follow-up question, which is how easy would it be to implement BibFrame if you don't have Alma?
That I suppose depends what LMS you have and how compatible it is. I know that EBSCO been working with Folio, developing that, and they've got close links with the Library of Congress, who have the Marva Quartz editor. So if you're with Folio already or heading in the Folio direction, that could be quite easy to implement BibFrame. If you've got another system, I really don't know. Sinopia can work. It's a standalone editor, so possibly it could connect quite easily with other systems, because you're just really exporting XML file records, and as long as your system can handle those, then I would guess it's okay.
Great. And we have a question. We'd love to hear more of your work on relating this to linked art. On the indexing of item info, had you thought about a local field, bib field, that is indexed for search but not displayed?
Yes, linked art is that's a big project still. At the moment, we're going to be working with mostly our MARC records from the Alma side and the EMU records from our cultural collection side, rather than BibFrame records into linked art. And that might actually be more a question for the technical people on our DLIP project rather than us, I think.
I'm hoping you can hook people up if they have technical questions.
Yeah, if people want to get in touch with us, our emails are in one of the slides, and we can connect you to the right people if we can't answer anything.
And I'll just add to that too. It's like I was saying in the presentation, we basically explored starting with BibFrame rather than MARC to go to the linked art model. It was already kind of decided that we were starting with where our records are right now, which is MARC. But once we started exploring it and realized it does make a lot more sense. It facilitates things a lot more. Hopefully we've got that in the minds now of the people, the more technical people who are working on that side of the project. So in the future, I think is what we're thinking and hoping for that.
Great. Thanks so much to all three of you and to all of our speakers this afternoon. I'm going to start to bring this afternoon to a close now. So I just want to remind you all that we're starting at the same time again tomorrow, which is 2 p.m. UK time. And the focus of tomorrow is inclusive cataloguing, and it's going to be hosted by my brilliant Vice Chair, Sarah Cusk. And we really look forward to seeing you all back here tomorrow. Thank you. Have a lovely evening.